Honestly, I don't even know where to begin. The stories from this time are so horrific that they don't even sound real anymore. They sound like a movie script. But for the people who lived through it, it was hell on earth. Just listen to the words of Agnolo di Tura, a man who watched his entire world crumble before his eyes. Victims died almost instantly. Swellings appeared under the arms and in the groin, and people would suddenly surrender their souls while simply talking. Fathers abandoned children, wives left husbands, and brothers turned their backs on each other. They believed the sickness spread by a mere breath or glance, so everyone ran. Yet they could not escape. Neither money nor friendship could find anyone willing to bury the dead. I buried 5 of my own children with my own hands. These are the haunting words of a historian living in Siena, Italy, in the mid-13th century. He was witnessing one of the deadliest catastrophes in human history, the Black Death. To understand the sheer scale of this nightmare, you have to imagine a world that suddenly stopped. Fields were left unplowed, animals wandered aimlessly through ghost towns, and silence replaced the noise of busy markets. This plague didn't just kill. It upended the entire cultural, religious, and political order of the world. The nightmare truly arrived in Europe in 1347 at the port of Messina, Italy. 12 trading ships docked, and the locals went to greet them, expecting silk and spices. Instead, they were met with a scene of absolute horror. Most of the sailors were dead. Those still alive were writhing in pain, covered in black boils and oozing wounds. The city officials immediately ordered the ships out of the harbor, but it was already too late. The invisible killer had stepped off the boats, but the seeds of this apocalypse had been sown earlier, in one of history's first and most brutal acts of biological warfare. In 1346, the Mongol Golden Horde was besieging the trading city of Kaffa on the Black Sea. But the plague struck the besiegers first. As the Mongol soldiers began to die by the thousands, their commander ordered a final, terrifying act of spite. They loaded the infected corpses of their dead soldiers onto catapults and launched them over the city walls. The people of Kaffa were bombarded with death from the sky. They tried to dispose of the bodies, but the disease spread like wildfire, eventually boarding the very ships that fled the city to bring the infection to the rest of the world. The cause was a bacteria named Yersinia pestis, living in the guts of fleas that rode on the backs of black rats. But back then, in a world without microscopes, no one understood this. Desperate for answers, humanity looked to the heavens. Professors in Paris claimed a planetary alignment of Saturn, Mars, and Jupiter had created a poisonous mist. Believing this miasma, or bad air, entered through the pores of the skin, people stopped bathing entirely. They sealed their windows with thick tapestries and carried bouquets of flowers to block the smell of death. We see images today of the plague doctors with their terrifying bird-like masks. But even that was a desperate attempt at survival. The beaks were stuffed with herbs and spices to filter out the so-called poisonous air. Others believed it was the wrath of God. Groups known as Flagellants roamed the streets of Europe, whipping themselves with leather straps until they bled, hoping to suffer enough to earn God's forgiveness. And when people are terrified, they look for someone to blame. Tragically, the Jewish population became a target. Accused of poisoning wells or practicing dark magic, thousands of innocent people were massacred or burned alive in city squares, from Strasbourg to Cologne, in a frantic attempt to stop a disease that no one understood. The disease itself was merciless. It started like a heavy cold, then came the swellings, black boils the size of apples in the groin or armpit. These would burst with foul-smelling pus, followed by fever and septic shock. Death usually came within 2 to 4 days. It happened so fast that, as records from the time tell us, a man could eat lunch with his friends and have dinner with his ancestors in the next world. Doctors were helpless. Their cures were often worse than the disease. They tried draining blood, popping the boils, or bathing patients in vinegar. The wealthy even drank crushed emeralds mixed with water, hoping the precious stone would purify them. Nothing worked. It wasn't just humans. Cows, sheep, and chickens died by the millions. The wool industry collapsed because there were simply no sheep left to shear. From this devastation, however, came a necessary invention. The Italians began forcing arriving ships to wait at anchor for 30 days to see if the crew died. They called this Trentino. This was later extended to 40 days, or quaranta in Italian, giving birth to the word we still use today, quarantine. But here lies the most fascinating paradox of the Black Death. This apocalypse, which buried nearly half of Europe, actually birthed a wealthier society for those who survived. It sounds impossible, but let's look at the economics. Before the plague, Europe was overcrowded. Labor was cheap. Peasants were essentially slaves to their lords, working for scraps because they had no other choice. If a peasant demanded higher pay, the lord could simply fire him and hire one of the 100 others waiting in line. But when the dust settled, the equation had flipped. There were fewer workers left to till the fields. Suddenly, the peasant wasn't just a cog in the machine. He was a rare commodity. Landlords and nobles panicked. They had crops rotting in the fields and no one to harvest them. They had to beg the survivors to work. Wages skyrocketed. In some parts of England, farm wages doubled or even tripled overnight. For the first time in history, the common man had leverage. He could look his lord in the eye and say, "Pay me more, or I will go work for your neighbor." The ruling class tried to stop this. They passed laws, like the Statute of Laborers in 1351, trying to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. They even passed sumptuary laws forbidding peasants from wearing fancy clothes or eating expensive meats. But you cannot fight the laws of supply and demand. The feudal system, which had trapped people for centuries, began to crumble. Furthermore, consider the inheritance. If a family of 10 had one farm, they were poor. If the plague killed 8 of them, the remaining 2 inherited everything. The land remained, the gold remained, the tools remained. But with fewer people to share it, the survivors found themselves significantly richer. They ate better meat, wore better wool, and lived in larger homes. The Black Death was a tragedy of unimaginable scale, but it was also the great reset button of history. It broke the chains of serfdom, redistributed wealth, and paved the way for the modern middle class. It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, the wheels of history never stop turning, often leading humanity to unexpected new beginnings. Thank you for watching. If you want to understand how the past shapes our wallets and our world today, don't forget to subscribe to History Insight